Deep within the mountains outside of Phoenix, Arizona, lies a gold mine. Not just any regular gold mine, one that has been lost to time itself and contains a treasure that is worth risking your life for. Or at least that's what many have believed before they fatally disappeared searching for the mysterious mine's location. This is the history and dark story of the Lost Dutchman's Mine. A quick disclaimer before I continue. In this video, I'm going to be covering the search for the Lost Dutchman's Mine and those who went looking for it. Many of these stories end in death and misfortune, so if that sounds too gruesome for you, then viewer discretion is advised. Otherwise, enjoy the video. Before the Lost Dutchman's Mine, there was the Apache, a Native American tribe that occupied areas of eastern Arizona, northern Mexico, west Texas, and southern Colorado. The Apache tribe was known for being politically autonomous and contained several subcultures within the tribe. Another well-known fact about the Apache, especially for those who thought of traveling through the area, was that they were highly skilled warriors and strategists. This leads us to the start of the Lost Dutchman's story. In 1840, a family from northern Mexico named the Peraltas supposedly traveled to the Superstition Mountains in order to set up a gold mine and try their luck at the gold rush. For those who do not know, the Superstition Mountains are a mountain range located in central Arizona that sprawls over 1,600 acres of rocky terrain. It's characterized by sheer cliffs and volcanic peaks that loom over a desert landscape. When the Peralta family arrived, they began work on their own gold mine. While not much is known about their time in the mountains, according to legend, they discovered that one currently unknown area in the mountains was rich with gold. After months of excavation and success, they decided it was time to return some of their findings to Mexico, and during what seemed to be a routine trek back, they were suddenly attacked. In the months that led up to this attack, the Apache of the area asked the Peralta family to leave, as the area in which the family had struck gold was sacred land. According to legend, the Apache decided it was time to make a lesson out of these gold miners. In a few months' time, they devised a dark plan, with the aid of some surrounding tribes to attack the miners and drive them into an isolated area where they would have no chance to survive. Unfortunately for the Peralta family, this is exactly what happened. In a valley nestled west of the Superstition Mountains, now known as Massacre Grounds, the Peralta family was ambushed. The Apache were skilled warriors and easily outmatched the unprepared Peralta family. Within moments, the Peralta family was killed, with only a few members of the family escaping to tell the tale. After the battle was over, the Apache gathered up the Peralta's gold and buried it somewhere within the mountain. They also sealed up the entrance to the mine so the sacred land would not be tampered with again. It is rumored that the Peralta's fortune was so large that it would be worth $200 million in today's currency. As word began to spread about the Apache attack and the supposed fortune located within the mountains, many began to try their luck at finding it. This leads us to our first story. The year is 1865. Dr. Abraham Thorne works as an Army medical doctor working at Fort McDowell in Arizona. During this time, the European colonization had spread west, and with it came the conflict between them and the natives who inhabited it. Dr. Thorne took advantage of this conflict, and through his expertise in medicine, he worked both sides of the coin. Not only was he a medical doctor for the U.S. Army, but he also aided injured Apache natives, which gained him the respect of tribal leaders in the area. According to an online forum I've read, after curing one of the nearby Apache leaders' eye disease, he was presented with the opportunity of a lifetime. The tribe offered to take him to the gold in the Superstition Mountains. This seemed like a life-changing opportunity for Dr. Thorne, but there was a catch. The tribe would only take him if he agreed to come blindfolded. This was clearly a highly risky endeavor. Not only would he be alone with the tribe, which he knew very little about, but he would also be completely unaware of his surroundings. Despite these barriers, he decided that because of his good standing with the tribe, he would allow himself to be taken to the gold blindfolded. And so the tribe took him on a 20-mile trek into the Superstition Mountains and then unveiled his blindfold. According to reports from Dr. Thorne, he was standing within a canyon with an unusually large rock pinnacle looming to the south. Supposedly the ground was littered with gold. The Apache allowed him to pick up as much gold as he wished before blindfolding him again and returning him back. Dr. Thorne then sold the gold for $6,000, which, adjusted to inflation, comes out to $140,000 in today's money. This made Dr. Thorne very happy and made his financial situation quite steady, but unfortunately, this isn't where our story ends. According to legend, Dr. Thorne attempted to find the location again with a couple of friends. Supposedly, after searching the mountains, the group came across the fabled mine and began to stuff their saddlebags full of all the gold they could carry. After they had packed all they could, they decided it was time to head back. However, on the way back, the Apache cut them off. Within moments, Dr. Thorne and his friends were swiftly killed, and the gold was then returned to the sacred location. The ending to Dr. Thorne's story seems to be a controversial one, as some records I've come across say that he refused to return to the mountain and never actually brought any friends out there. By any account, it's guaranteed that Dr. Thorne never claimed any gold from the Superstition Mountains again. Jacob Waltz was born in Germany in 1810. Not much is known about his early life, but we do know by 1870, when Jacob was 60 years old, he had become good friends with an heir to the Peralta family. For those who have forgotten by this point, the Peraltas were the original owners of the Lost Dutchman's mine. Jacob Waltz had immigrated from Germany to Arizona, and from there he became deeply interested in the mysterious gold mine's location within the mountains. Mr. Waltz, unlike Dr. Thorne, was not without experience. He had been working as a prospector in the area for a few years prior, so he knew his fair share of the dangers. Waltz was also accused of high-grading ore from the vulture mine that he worked at. For those who don't know, high-grading ore is when a miner contracted by a mining company or prospector takes high-value ore they find for themselves while leaving the poor quality for the company. As a result, Mr. Waltz was dismissed from his position at the company. In the following years, Mr. Waltz met an Apache girl named Kenty, and he fell in love with her despite the drastic age difference of about 40 years. The two then became married and moved out to the Apache Mountains. According to sources, he then learned more information about the mine's location from Kenty, who was well aware of it due to her Apache upbringings. It's interesting to think of the sequence of events for Jacob Waltz's life up to this point. While just a theory, it's possible that Jacob Waltz could have simply been using Kenty as a means to discover the mine's location, as he was already well acquainted with a descendant of the Peralta family, so he would have to know about this prior. Apparently, Kenty and Jacob did not have a happy ending. Somehow, the Apache found out that Kenty had told Jacob about the mine, and retaliated by attacking the two. Waltz was able to escape, but Kenty was captured. The Apache allegedly then removed her tongue for revealing the location of their sacred land to an outsider. Several years went by for Waltz, and by this point he was running a saloon in the Tortilla Flats when he met Jacob Wisner, another prospector in the area. The two then began to discuss the marvel of the Lost Dutchman's mine. Waltz was confident he could locate the mine, and with the help of Wisner, the two could become rich. The pair then made their way back up the Superstition Mountains. Many began to grow suspicious of the two, as they would continually purchase supplies in Phoenix with high-grade ore, but would never say where they had obtained it from. This continued for a while until those same people would begin to see Waltz show up alone to the store. Around the same time, Wisner was also reported missing, as no one had seen him in a few months. It's alleged that Waltz likely killed Wisner somewhere in the Superstition Mountains, so he would no longer have to share the profit. Waltz would continue his cycle of coming in and out of Phoenix, carrying large amounts of high-value gold, for the next 10 years. It's said that many would pry and attempt to get Waltz to tell his secrets, but every time he would give contradictory statements. And following him was another hard task, as apparently he was well skilled in losing followers. Waltz's story came to a tragic end in 1891 when he was 81 years old. One fateful day, a flood tore through Waltz's home. He survived the disaster, but having suffered through the cold water, he got hypothermia, and eventually it turned into pneumonia. Due to this, he spent some time in a local hospital and began to give hints of the mine to his caretakers. The workers knew of the fortune he had been bringing to the town throughout the past 10 years and pushed him to tell more, but as time dragged on, his condition worsened. Furthermore, Jacob Waltz eventually suffered a stroke in the hospital, which rendered him unable to speak, making it even harder for his caretakers to find out any more information about the gold's location. Jacob Waltz would die on October 25, 1891. It's said that the nurse who took care of him and several other members of his caretaker team would go on to lose most of their money searching for the fabled mine's location. Furthermore, Two brothers named Herman and Reinhard Petrasch would actually end up never speaking to each other ever again, both of them blaming the other for not listening to Walt's directions closer. Jacob's story would actually be the reason why it was called the Lost Dutchman's Mine. During this time, it was a common mistake to call or confuse German people with Dutch and vice versa. So while Jacob was a natural-born German, people mistaken him as Dutch, hence the name for the mine. In the summer of 1880, a little before Jacob Waltz's death, two recently discharged soldiers from a nearby fort came to the town of Pinal, Arizona, looking for work in the local Silver King mine. Aaron Mason, the local prospector for the Silver King mine, stated that the two men revealed a bag of high-grade ore during the interview to show they had experience. According to Mason, he was so shocked by the richness of the gold and asked how the two had found it. The two men explained that on their way to town, while they were going through the Superstition Mountains, they had come across an old mine shaft. Mason immediately entered a partnership with the two soldiers, who explained that they would be able to find the mine again. The two were outfitted with the equipment they needed and went off on their way to find the mine once again. Mason reportedly waited 2 weeks for the men to return, but there was no sign of them. He began to worry that the two had taken the equipment and ran, but the prospect was far too great for one party to turn and run. Mason hired a search party in the following days, and eventually they located the two men. What they found was a horrific sight that left Mason scarred for the remainder of his life. The two men were found nude out in the middle of the mountains, all of their equipment and gear gone. They both had a bullet hole in the middle of their head and had been dead for several days. But this isn't where the story ends. The next year, a prospector under the name of Joe Deering had heard the story of the soldiers' untimely deaths. Joe then made it his mission to find the location of the mine. After some time around the Superstition Mountains, Joe returned to town a different man. Joe told those at his local bar that he had found the mine, but this is how he described it, quote, "The most god-awful rough place you can imagine. A ghostly place." Joe continued to work part-time at the Silver King mine so he could save up enough money to excavate the mine. But just 2 weeks later, he was killed in a cave-in without ever disclosing the mine's location. Elijah Rivas, or better known as the Madman of the Superstitions, was a hermit who lived in the valley near Pinal. For context, Pinal is a city that lies about 45 miles away from the Superstition Mountains. Rivas was a strange case to the locals. He was known for being utterly insane, but people knew he came from an educated background. In fact, Rivas was college educated, which in the 1800s was not a common feat. He even worked as a teacher for a while before moving out to Arizona, hoping to strike his luck at the gold rush. Rivas lived alone outside of Pinal and farmed his own food to survive. It's said that while he didn't hate company of others, he instead preferred to spend his time reading his collection of books in his own personal library. Rivas was a relatively friendly man, and it was not uncommon for him to allow strangers into his home just to chat or exchange knowledge. The locals knew that Rivas was a highly intelligent man with his own quirks. For example, he would never shave his beard, which reportedly grew past his chest. He would also seldom bathe, so those who encountered him knew the man had a stench that followed. Rumors around the town even claimed that he was prone to, quote, running around the valley naked with nothing in hand but a pistol. Another strange feature of Rivas was that he would reportedly never enter a homestead with a woman inside, and wouldn't dare allow one to come up to his place in the mountains. It was even said that the Apache knew of Rivas and would stray away from the man, leaving him alone at all costs. It was well known that Rivas was a madman to those who lived nearby. In the spring of 1896, a few friends of Rivas's had reportedly not seen him in a few weeks. As a result, the group of them traveled out to his home, but he was nowhere to be seen. The next few days were spent looking for Rivas out in the Superstition Mountains. On May 16, 1986, a few weeks after Rivas was originally reported missing, they discovered his body 4 miles away from his home in Rogers Canyon. Even more disturbingly, it is said that his head was completely severed from his body, and coyotes had been feasting upon his corpse for days. No one quite knows what happened to Rivas and how his head was completely removed from his body, but locals continued to talk about the curse beset in the Superstition Mountains and concluded that Rivas was another one of its unfortunate victims. Adolf Ruth was an amateur explorer and treasure hunter in the 1900s. His story is described as the true catalyst for the mysticism behind the Dutchman's mind. Adolf Ruth was a man following his dreams. He envisioned that one day he would find a massive treasure that would not only make him rich, but also make his name well known. His journey for the lost Dutchman's mind began when his son, Erwin Ruth, gave him a treasure map that predated the Mexican Revolution. According to his son, he had been given the map after saving the life of a Mexican officer. Ruth's search originally began in California, where he spent many months attempting to locate the map's secrets. At one point, he even broke his hip out in the Californian desert. Mr. Ruth would spend several hours on his back in the desert before a search party, led by his son, would find him. While spending some time healing in the hospital, he continued to look through and study the maps his son had given him. Eventually, he figured out that he had been searching in the wrong area. The new segment on the map he located became known as the Peralta Ruth map. It was mid-May in the year 1931 when Ruth arrived in Arizona. After convincing some of the local ranchers, he was able to hitch a ride into the Superstition Mountains, despite the warnings from the locals. Ruth then set up his camp and began spending his days searching the nearby land for the rumored treasure. A man named Tex Barkley would do routine check-ins for Mr. Ruth to ensure that he was alive. But in June of that year, Tex Barkley performed his routine check-in, but Mr. Ruth was nowhere to be seen. Realizing that time was of the essence, Tex Barkley immediately warned the authorities, and a search party ensued. It took until December, 6 months after his original disappearance, for authorities to locate any sign of Adolf Ruth. Lying deep within the Superstition Mountains was Adolf Ruth's skull. It took a few more days for authorities to find the rest of his remains, as they were oddly scattered across the area. Many rumors and ideas have circulated regarding Ruth's untimely demise. Within his skull were 2 holes, which some have determined to be bullet holes, though never confirmed. But it leads many to believe that he was murdered for finding the mine. Another rumor states that just like Revis, Ruth's head had been decapitated, and others claim he simply died from starvation or dehydration. What confused authorities even more was the fact that, despite being far away from his camp, Ruth's treasure map was still back at camp. He had not taken it with him, which seems like a strange decision considering he was out there to locate the mine. A man named Guy Frank followed in Ruth's tracks a year later, and actually returned to town with gold from the Superstition Mountains. But just a month later, he was found dead in the mountains with a gunshot wound to the stomach. Even more strangely, a pile of high-value gold ore was left next to his corpse. The stories I covered today only scratch the surface of the Superstition Mountain's tale. The mountain is plagued with misfortune and death, and those who wish to plunder the mountains of its goods need to be on the lookout for any dangers that may arise. In current day, a lot of the mysticism behind the lost Dutchman's mind has faded into urban legends. It's hard to separate truth from fiction at this point, but there are pieces of evidence that show us that there is something more happening in this mountain range than meets the eye. Whether that be a vengeful descendant of the Apache hoping to protect the sacred land, a lone spirit that haunts the mountain, or possibly some string of bad luck that led to the creation of this legend, we will likely never know. But I truly believe that the mystery and cryptic nature of this place is what makes it so incredibly interesting. And I hope that people will continue to talk of the mystifying history of the lost Dutchman's mine. If you enjoyed this video, consider watching my previous Cursed Locations video on the Rainbow Springs Resort, one of the most haunted resorts to ever exist. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.